And my plan for today is that we should first have some general questions, or check if there are any general questions. And after that, I will talk a little bit about the quiz, and we will do an example together. But hopefully the majority of the time we can use so that you guys can focus on working on the tasks for lecture 3. And when we come to that later, when it's time for you to work on the tasks, you can work alone or you can work in pairs or smaller groups. And here I can recommend you to use either Zoom or Discord to communicate with each other if you want to work in groups. And when you start working with the task, take it slowly. Let the tasks take however much time that they require. Don't stress. It is important that you understand the solutions for the tasks, especially now in the beginning. So even if there are videos of me solving the tasks, solve them on your own and use the videos as help if you get stuck. All right, so that is the plan for today. First, some general questions, then the quiz and an example, and then after that, there's time for you to work on the lecture 3 tasks. So it's been about a week. If you have any general questions, please just write them in the chat and we can see if it's something that we can talk about here. Maybe something from the first week. For example, have you had time to look at the course area on Canvas? Have you read the study guide? Do you know how or what the examinations are for this course? There is one more thing. There is a video in the forum where I show how you upload to examination 1. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's under the post about formatting output. If you haven't seen it, I can recommend having a look at it. I'm just going to check if there are any questions. I can't see any at the moment. But if you have any questions, just write them in the chat. We will talk about the questions from the quiz a little bit later, or just in a second, really. So we'll get back to that. And then there is information about examination 1. Or there is a question about examination 1. And the information for examination 1, you can check the study guide. It talks a little bit about examination 1, and then after that you can go to assignments on Canvas. There you can find the tasks for examination 1, and you can choose to solve one or many of the problems for each task, but you must solve at least one for each task. And under each of the problems, you can upload it to CodeGrade. What is recommended to know before taking the examination task? I think you can start with the examination tasks fairly early. What is included in the examination task, if we take the first one, task 1, it is the lectures up until that examination. So depending on how far you have read in the book, if you have studied ahead, you can start earlier. But even if you haven't done that, I think you can start pretty early, because you can do the first steps of Polya's problem-solving technique. You can make sure that you understand the problem, and you can make sure that you start planning how to solve it. So start as early as possible, and as soon as you have a script that you think will pass, upload it and see if it passes. If it doesn't, it will give you information about what the problem is, and then you can upload again. And if you have done the first task, you can definitely continue. So all the problems are already listed for all the 3 tasks on Canvas. So you can continue working on the other ones if you like. So you can add them in as soon as you want, really. All right. I can't see. One more thing. There was a question about what chapters you should read. If you go to the study guide, you can kind of see what chapters it is there. In the very end, there is a list of what chapters is connected to what lecture. So there you can see what chapters you should read when in the course. And that also applies to the examinations. All right. If you have any more questions, just write them in the chat and Patrick will answer them for you. But let's continue and take a look at the quiz that you guys did for today. And as you saw, the deadline is before the lecture. So the intention, as I've mentioned before, is that you should study and prepare and do the quiz before the lecture. And then during the lecture, I will talk a little bit. There will be an introduction, what I'm doing now. And then afterwards, you can work on the task that we have under lecture 3. But for this quiz for today, there were 103 students who did the quiz, which is roughly 2/3 of all the students who are registered in the course. And on average, you got 81% correct answers, which I think is good. This is the first quiz that we had, and you weren't quite familiar with it. So I think 81% in average for correct answers was good. So well done. And if we take a look at how long it took you to do the quiz, in average, it took somewhere between 12 and 13 minutes. So hopefully you didn't feel stressed when you did the quiz, because that is not the intention of the quiz. I saw there was a question if I can open the quiz again. No, the intention is for the quiz to be motivation for you guys to be active throughout the course, and as the quizzes can award you 2 extra points for examination 1. If you miss them, you have missed them. I will not open them afterwards. I hope that makes sense. But there was one question that caused a lot of problems. And if I remember correctly, this is the one that we got a question about in the chat before. I might be wrong, and then we can take a look at that one later, but I think it is this one. And that is the one where we should format the output of pi. I was thinking that we can look at this together in Visual Studio Code. So let me just open Visual Studio Code here. And you should now be able to see it. And hopefully today it is a little bit easier to read the screen, so that it's a little bit higher resolution. Perfect, perfect. So here we have the task, and I have summarized the instructions here, that the minimum field width should be 10, and the number of decimals should be 2, and the text should be right aligned. And this is where we should input something that makes all this happen. And so what should we print here? And I saw it in the chat. This is maybe the most straightforward answer. There are other ways to answer this question. So if you answered something else on the quiz, you might still have got the correct answer. But this is the most straightforward way of answering it. And I will explain why. We can kind of see it here now that we have 10 is the minimum width. We can see that that is why we write 10 here. And then 2 decimals, okay, .2 means that we will use 2 decimals. And the F here indicates that it's a floating point number that we're trying to format. We also have this bit here about it being right aligned, but if we try to run this, we can see that it is already right aligned. So the default is that it is right aligned. So we don't actually have to do anything to get it right aligned. But if we want it right aligned, and we actually want to explicitly say that it should be right aligned, we can add this greater than sign before 10. So this is one of the other answers that you could have for the quiz for today. And we see that, yes, now it is to the right, it's right aligned. If we have a lesser than sign, now it's left aligned here. But we wanted it right aligned, so we can remove it. There we have it. So now it says, we got a question here that you didn't understand that it was the number of spaces. And what it says was that the minimum field width is 10. That means that the number, or the one that we are formatting, plus the number of spaces. So all of this together should be at least 10 spaces or 10 positions. And why it says minimum is that if whatever you're formatting is longer than 10, it will grow to be bigger than 10. All right, so that is the most straightforward answer to this question. I know it's tricky with formatting the output, and we will talk a little bit more about formatting and stay on this task for a little bit. But I just want to also mention that if you go to the discussion forum that we have and the post that I mentioned before, which is called, let's see if I remember it myself here, about formatting output. In there is also a Python script included with an example of how you can format code. So I really recommend reading that post. All right, but if we have this task here, what we are doing here is that we are building or constructing a string. We see that we have one string here, then we use a plus sign, and then we get another string from formatting this number of hours, and then finally we have one more little string here with a quotation mark here. But what we can do is actually take this, put it into, or maybe I should do this. I'll keep this, and I'll comment it out, and we can change this one here instead. So we have the old one still there. We can maybe make it a little bit more clear if we take this thing that we're doing in the print and doing it in its separate step. So if we move it out and assign it to a variable, and then that is what we are printing instead. And if we run it, we'll see that it will print exactly the same thing. It is just that we have divided it into a few more steps. We have assigning this to a variable, then we're printing the variable. And sometimes it's easier to understand the code if you have each step separately. And this can also be good. So if we have now assigned this message that we want to print to a variable called message, if we want to print it several times, or if we want to print it to the screen and write it to a file, we don't have to construct the string again. We already have it constructed, so we can write it to several places if we like. I'm just checking the chat here. All right, sorry for the interruption there. There was one more thing I wanted to talk about here with this example, and that is formatting. We see here that we are formatting our output, but we can actually format it in a few different ways. And I was thinking that I should show two more ways here. So if we comment this out maybe, and then we use this one as a base for the next one. And I'll just write the code and then we can talk about it. So give me a second here and I'll just change the code around. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, I think that is correct. Let's try it. It's always exciting when you rewrite your code to see if you actually manage to get it right. And yes, we can see that we are printing the same thing. But what we are doing here is that we are using placeholders instead. We can see we have our string here, and if we are just reading this part here, if we are quickly scrolling through our code, trying to figure out what it does, it is easier to read this part and to get some understanding of what it will print. We can see here that, all right, it will print pi is equal to, and here is our placeholder. This will be replaced with something, but if we give it a reasonable name, we can name it anything, but if we give it a reasonable name, we can quickly see that, all right, it will print pi is equal to, and then a number. And then if we're interested in how it will be formatted, we can see that afterwards here. So then we can quickly see, all right, this is what it will print. Exactly how will it print it? We see that here. So whatever the placeholder pi is will be replaced with this. So it's the same, it's just a little bit different, maybe a little bit easier if you're quickly scrolling through the code. But I think that we can have one more example of how to format our code. So we'll comment that out. And we'll have a look at one more example. And I'll do the same here. I'll rewrite it and then we can talk about it. And I think I managed to get it correct. We'll see. We'll run it. And we see we still get the same output. So it seems like I did it correct. But what did I do? Well, here in this example, I am using something called an F string or a format string. Usually they are just called F strings. And we can see here I have my string, but just before it, we have this F here. That indicates that it is an F string. And now if we want to print a variable in here, what we can do is that we have, similar to our placeholder, it's just that we have the variable name directly. And we can also add the formatting right away. So it's much compacter than the one that we saw before up here, but it's still similar as we have this placeholder, something that will be replaced. And in this course, you will see me using these F strings a lot. I prefer this way of formatting strings, and in Python they are a little bit faster for Python to handle than the other formatting that we saw before. But you can use any of these that that suits you. So F strings, and we have the format, and we had the separate one here where we built it up. And we are gonna change to PowerPoint again. So that was the first one that caused a little bit of problems during the or for the quiz. There were two more questions on the quiz that were a bit problematic, maybe not as much as the previous one, but I thought that we could still talk about them. And it was the one where you should print Anna Persson to the screen, and the one where you should read an integer. But instead of just looking at answers for those, I was thinking that we can do an example together. So what we will do now is that we will do the example that we see here behind me. So we will create a script that prints a vaccination certificate to the screen, given the format that we see here. And we see that Max Smith and 2 are in bold. That means that we can see under the text there that those should be read while we're running the script. So we shouldn't print them in bold. It just means that those values we should read while we're running the script. So all right, we will read the first name, the last name, and how many shots we got, and then we will print this message to the screen. But before we do that, now that we're going to solve this task, it is important that we approach the problem in a structured way. And it's especially important now in the beginning so that we get a good routine for how to solve problems. This problem it's fairly small, but soon you will have bigger problems or more complicated problems to solve. And if you haven't practiced solving problems in a structured way, it will be tricky later on. So it's good to get a good structure, a good routine for how to solve problems. And what we can see here on the screen is, in green, is what I have in chapter 2 in the book. So you probably recognize it from there. And above that, we can see in blue and in pink the corresponding parts in Polya's problem-solving technique, which we are using. But I think the reason I put it here on the screen is that I think the explanation in the book for the last 4 steps here is really good. So I do recommend you to read that if you haven't already. Not all of you are in Sweden yet. No, I know. And it is a bit tricky. Of course it is. It is tricky for everyone that we are always online. Hopefully for you guys, for the second part of this semester, it will be on campus only. But we'll share the screen. It's better now. Oh, that's perfect if it's better. It just required us to take a short little break and talk about how much we dislike being online. It is better, a little bit better. And if I switch to this one, good, yeah, much better. Don't ask me to explain what happens with Zoom, because I have no idea, but it's good that it's solved. It's magically solved without us changing anything. But let's go back to where we were then, because what I wanted to say here is that in the book, they explain the last 4 steps quite good. So have a look there if you haven't already read that part for chapter 2. And now that we've talked about that, what I was thinking that we should do is that we should actually develop a plan for how to solve the problem. So if I can just switch to my iPad here. And I hope that you guys can see this one too. We can try here. Is it readable? Perfect. Thank you so much for enduring our technical difficulties here. All right, so there were a few things that we needed to do. The first one was that we should read the first name and then the last name, and then we also needed to read how many shots this person got from the vaccination. So I'm gonna add that here. I'm gonna say this is the first thing I want my script to do, to read the first name. And as you can see here, I am using a parallelogram, indicating that it is something that the script should read from the user or output to the user. The quality dropped again, but it's readable. It's readable. Good. Thank you. And after we have read the first name, we should read the last name. So it's similar. And we also said that we need to read how many shots they got. So that was the first part. And now I am thinking that when I have read all this data, what I need to do is to combine the first name and the last name to the full name. So I will store it in another variable. And here I am using a rectangle, indicating that this is not something that we ask the user or that we output to the screen. It's just processing that we do in our script. And when we have combined the first and the last name, what we need to do next is to actually display the certificate. That is something that we print, so it should be a parallelogram. And after we have done all this, we are done. So then we just have to end it all. So if we have everything on the screen, we first read the first name, then we read the last name and the number of shots. Then we combine the first and last name into full name. And finally, we display the certificate. Yeah, I will share the screen now as we switch to Visual Studio Code, because what we will do now is that we will do this in Visual Studio Code. So let me just prepare that and then I will share the screen instead. Just give me a second here. Give me a second here. I'm still here. I'm just trying to place the windows so that we can see everything. I will share my screen. I will just try to see, because it's still bad, isn't it? Yeah, and then we share the screen. Give me a second here. It's very bad. The strange thing about it being bad is that we did the same in the morning with the Swedish group, and then it was just fine. So it must be something else. I'll have to look into it. All right, you should now be able to see my screen a little bit clearer. Super clear? That's good. All right. So what we can see here now then is that we have our plan for how we should solve the task on the right, and here on the left I have Visual Studio Code, and I will use the same file that we used before. I will just delete all the code that we have, and now what we will do is that we will use this one to actually solve this task. So what do we need to do now? Well, the good thing about having created this plan that we did is that now we have a recipe for how to solve this task. We don't have to sit and write the code and figure out the solution at the same time. What we can do now is just to follow our own plan. So the first one is to read the first name. We can do something like this. Enter first name, for example. So we use the input function to read something from the user, and what we have here is the prompt, what will be printed on the screen so that the user knows what to print. We will store whatever the user enters into a variable called first name. And we can see that the second step is very similar. It is just that we should read the last name instead. So I will copy the first row that we had, and I'll just change the text and the variable name. So it says enter last name instead, and it's stored in a variable called last name. And the third one, the next step that we have here is to read the number of shots that this person got. So we can say shot count is equal to input and enter number of shots. And maybe we should have a colon here too, so it's similar to the other ones. But what we are doing here is that we are asking the user to enter something, and when we read it from the user, we read it as text. So we read it as a string. But the number that we are reading, the number of shots, it is actually an integer. So what we need to do is to tell Python that, all right, whatever you read from the user now, it comes as a string, but can you please make it into an integer for me? So we read something, it comes back as a string, then we tell Python to convert it into an integer. Okay, I see you're on top of it, Patrick, thank you. So now we have done the first 3 steps here. And as Patrick wrote, the reason I have an extra space here is just so that when we read it from the user later on, they won't start typing right away here. There will be some space before whatever they type. And we see we have the first 3 solved. Now the next one, the next step here is to combine first and last name. All right, let's do that. So we call it full name. Full name is equal to, and here we can practice using the F strings. We can say that, all right, I want to create an F string, and what do I want to use in the F string here? Well, I want to take the first name, then after the first name there's going to be a space, and then I want last name. So we are constructing a new string here, which consists of our first name, then a space, and then the last name. And these, of course, the variables here, they will be read from whatever the user entered. Right, so that was the next step here. We see this combined first and last name, and we have one left here to actually display the certificate to the user now that we have entered all the information. And again, we're going to use an F string, and what will we print? We will print the full name, and then we have the message that was on the slide before, has received, and how many shots, that's the shot count variable that we're using here, COVID-19 vaccination shots. I think this is how we had it. And I see here a question, if we need to actually convert it to an integer. And Patrick answered here too, yes. And the reason, we could have left it as a string, as we are only using it to print it here. But to show how we actually read a number, I read it as a number, as it is a number for how many shots we have actually received, or how many shots this person has received. But in this case, we could have left it as a string. But we need to convert it to a number if we want to do any counting or use it to add it to another variable or something. All right, so we have done all the steps here. Now let's just try to run it and see what happens. And we can see here that there is some space in between here. This is the reason why we added a space up here, so that there is some distance between here. And now if I write Max Smith has received 2 shots maybe. And Max Smith has received 2 COVID-19 vaccination shots. All right, it's something you guys are discussing. I see Patrick is on it. So what we have here is we have solved the problem. But how is this connected to those 2 questions from the quiz then? Well, the first thing here is this part here and also this part here. We know that we have read some information from the user and now we want to display it. Here we use the data from those variables that we have. Full name is the one that we combined first and last name, and shots count is the one that we read directly from the user. So instead of hard coding in what it should print, we should actually use the variables. So in the case with the quiz, we had a question where it should print Anna Persson, then we should use the variables to do that. And the second connection to that quiz that we had is this one here that we just talked a little bit about. If we ask the user for some data, we will get it back as a string. But if we want it as an integer, we have to explicitly tell Python to convert it into an integer for us. And here we can also replace this with a float if we want it as a float instead. But in this case, it is an integer, so we write int parentheses and then a parenthesis on the end too. All right. So only numerical strings can be converted into a string. So only to an int. Yes, so it's only numbers. So if you have hello or Andreas or Max or Smith, that cannot be converted into a number. All right, and with that, I think I will stop sharing. And now, this was what I was thinking that I should cover here during the lecture. So what I will do here now is that I will stop the recording and then I will be back in a second.